Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. We've just completed a video series making a jacket, two jackets actually, with a welt pocket, sleeves, lining, shawl collar, bound buttonholes, piping, and even how to interrupt the piping to create button loops. Almost all of those videos can apply to the 500 vest and even the 600 walking vest from the Daryl Lancaster Pattern Collection. Links for those are below in the show notes. Here you can see a couple versions of the 500 vest, which is essentially built on the 100 jacket body. It is fully lined, but the hem of the vest is attached as if the lining is actually an underlining. The vest has a square armhole, which makes fitting much easier. And to finish off the arm, there is an armhole band. This band is optional, and the width of the band is certainly subjective. I've even had students, once the vest is completed, decide to leave off the armhole band and just finish the edge with some bias trim. The armhole has been cut back into the body to allow room for the band. Construction of this vest is fairly straightforward, except for a couple of details. First, I'm a person who likes pockets, and since the vest is shorter, options are limited. The welt pocket featured in a previous video can work, but the pocket bag itself must be trimmed down to fit into the space between the welt and the lower edge of the garment. The pocket bag would be invisible behind the lining. The 600 walking vest is a longer version of the 500 vest. The biggest difference here is the side pocket. There is enough length in the walking vest to have a discrete side pocket, and I'll be covering those in a future video. Of course, the 500 vest, like my jackets, has a shawl collar option with bound buttonholes, all of which we've covered in previous videos. And so I'm going to assemble a 500 vest showing the areas that might be new to you. I recently wrote a blog post about the components of this vest, and that link will be below. The fabric was hand woven from a variegated chenille from Silk City Fibers and a spongy cotton bamboo yarn, also from Silk City Fibers. The structure was an 8-shaft shadow weave, so the two warp yarns were alternated in a dark-light fashion. And the same with the weft. Each of those yarns was also in its own shuttle in the weft, alternating dark and light. The draft and the project notes are available for free from my e-store, and that link is below. I didn't have enough hand-woven fabric to create the bands too, but as I described in the blog post, I ended up creating the bands from a leftover woven alpaca pile of vintage fabric gifted to me by a student. This is the kind of fabric that's created for a zip-out lining in a vintage trench coat. I had lined a vest many years ago with this fabric, and then had it roll out to trim the exterior edges of the vest. I sold that vest, but always remembered that technique, and I had just enough to replicate the idea in the neck and the armhole bands. As for the lining, I cut up a vintage silk blouse I recently got from my mom when she was culling some of the garments in her wardrobe that she didn't think she would wear again. She is approaching 90. I've gone ahead and stay stitched the neck and shoulder edges of the vest body and the lining pieces as well. There is a video that I've shot for Threads magazine that explains stay stitching in detail. So please watch that if you're unsure of what stay stitching means and how to do it. I should note that after sampling, I decided to use a fusible underlining on the garment fabric. I used a black texturized inserted weft interfacing available in my eShop, which maintains the spongy quality of the vest fabric, but stabilizes it enough to support the woven pile bands. And I should note that fusing to chenille can be a challenge because you don't want to smash the pile. I used this really important but rarely used velvet board that I've had since the 1960s. And it is actually still available from wawak.com, though it has become frightfully expensive. You can see there are steel teeth that the pile will embed into to keep it from being crushed. Carefully steam and fuse the underlining onto the back of each garment section using the velvet board for support of the pile. Once the stay stitching is complete, each armhole intersection of the armhole seam allowance and the underarm seam allowance has to be reinforced because we will ultimately be clipping to separate the two seam allowances from each other. I've gone ahead and done that step on all 8 armhole intersections. There are 2 fronts and 2 backs for the vest body and 2 more of each for the lining. But I will explain what I did. To reinforce an area that will be clipped close, you'll set your machine to stitch with the smallest stitches it can do and still move forward. And check to make sure that the dot from the pattern has been transferred to the garment and the lining pieces. For the garment fabric, I've used a tailor's tack on the right side. And for the lining, I've used a white pencil on the wrong side. In this case, it's easier to mark the intersection where I'm going to stitch with tailor's chalk on the wrong side of the garment because it has a black interfacing. I want to carefully plan my path. I'll be stitching exactly on the 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam line, pivoting at the corner dot or mark. I started stitching about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters away from the corner marking, right on the seam line, heading for the corner. Just a tip, if you're working with an electronic or computerized sewing machine that has a needle down option, use it so that when you are stitching along with the tiniest stitches that your machine can do, when you hit the corner intersection, the needle will be in the down position. You don't want to overshoot the corner or intersection marking. Once you reach the corner marking, leave the needle in, lift the presser foot, and pivot the fabric to continue in the new direction. Continue sewing with tiny stitches for about another inch or 2.5 centimeters. I can't stress enough how critical it is to get this right the first time. There's little in sewing that you can't rip out if you mess it up. But with these tiny, tiny stitches with matching thread, and you do want the thread to match, through only one layer of fabric, that's something that not even I can rip out. The next step, once you've reinforced all those corners, is to sew the side seams together. This is the part that everyone messes up. We've talked about sewing seams in a previous video. Pin what you know is correct and make everything else fit. You'll be stitching with the direction of the grain from widest to narrowest, which in this case would be from the hem to the underarm. That's not the part that everyone gets wrong. What they get wrong is they continue and just instinctively stitch the shoulders together. There's an odd construction sequence here, and because we have to sew the lining to the underarm first, you can't sew the shoulders together just yet. So here we have a vest and a lining, both flat with open shoulder seams. Put them right sides together. And now we will attach them at the underarms. I like to do this with the garment fabric facing me, mostly so that I know I can stitch right on top of that reinforcing stitching so that it won't show when the vest is complete. Carefully match the garment to the lining at the corner intersections at either side of the underarm. Use a pin to line them up and create a visual starting and stopping point. Pin the two layers together across the underarm, matching the side seam stitching line. You'll start stitching at one intersection, placing the needle right in the corner. Use normal stitches, so if you don't get this part right, you can rip it out. Stitch forward a couple of stitches, count them, and then backstitch the same amount of stitches. Do not backstitch past the corner. Stitch across the underarm with a 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance until you get to the other corner and stop when the needle hits the intersection. Take a couple of back stitches. Again, do not extend the seam beyond the corner intersection. Check carefully and cut back on the seam if it extends past the corner on either end. Now repeat the step for the other underarm. Check both the garment fabric and the lining that you started and stopped exactly on the pivot point from the reinforcing stitching. Now comes the moment of no return. We saw this on the bound buttonhole video. Once you clip, there's no going back. Using scissors with sharp points, clip all 4 corners to the reinforcing stitching. Do not clip past the stitching, but don't be shy either. The goal here is to be able to release the seam allowances so that the underarm seam allowances can be pressed down towards the body and the armhole seam allowances can attach to the armhole bands. Temporarily, turn the lining to the wrong side to check that you've clipped far enough and that there are no puckers at the points. If you're happy with the turns, flip the lining back so that the vest and the lining are once again right sides together. Grade the underarm seam allowances. This means trim the lining seam allowance to 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter and the handwoven to 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. Now, Turn the lining so that it is wrong sides together with the vest. The underarm will be finished. Give the underarm seam a good pressing. Place the vest body right sides together, matching the shoulders and folding the lining out of the way. This is a little bit of spatial gymnastics. Stitch the front and back together at the shoulders from neck to armhole with the direction of the grain. Reverse the direction of the vest and now put the lining fronts and back right side together and pin the shoulders. Stitch the lining shoulder seams the same way you did for the vest body. And then press everything open.
Well, I'll pick him up.
No, actually, he's watching. Mulder, did I do it right? Nest the lining within the vest body and you almost have a vest. I'll pin the two layers together on all edges and then I will machine baste all the edges except the lower edge where the hem will be. Baste 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters from the cut edge to hold them together. I like to keep the lining face up for this step. It slips less than the hand-woven fabric. Let the feed dogs do their job easing in the hand-woven. Then across the lower edge, in preparation for a Hong Kong seam finish, machine baste the two layers together at just a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter seam from the cut edge. I'll be applying a Hong Kong seam finish to the lower edge of the garment, encasing both layers. And then I'll turn up the hem. Next time, I'll show you how to hem the vest and attach the bands. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.